Guys, good morning. I really love our church. The barbecue yesterday was great with our volunteers. I just look forward to coming here every Sunday, whether I'm with you guys, whether I'm with the kids. But we are in our second week of our series on faith, and this morning we are going to talk about being tested. We like things that are tested. When something is tested, we see it as being safer. We see it as being more reliable. We see it as being stronger. We see it as having more value. And yes, there's always a few weirdos who love being guinea pigs. But the majority of the rest of us, we like things that have already been tested. And think about if you're going in for like a really important surgery, okay? And the surgeon comes in and he's prepping you for the procedure. He's telling you, what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. And right before he leaves, he says, "Oh yeah, by the way, this is my first surgery ever. So good luck to the both of us, okay?" And so I mean, that if he did that, that would be something that would not instill a whole lot of confidence in you. Another example, I like to shop on Amazon quite a bit. And oftentimes I'll find something that I really like, and the price is right, and the description is exactly what I'm looking for. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to buy this. And then I see that it has no reviews. And I'm like, okay, hold up. Like, why is it? Like, this seems like really good on the description, but why is it that nobody else has bought this? What am I missing here? And so really we want our food to be tested, okay? We want our doctors to be tested. We want our products to be tested, and we want our medicine to be tested. Just about everything we want to be tested except for ourselves. And the thing is that pretty much everyone can agree that tested is better. So why is it when it comes to ourselves, when it comes to those challenges, those tests, those trials, why is it that we'd rather just be left alone than have to face those? James talks about this in the book of James. I always think that'd be pretty cool to have a book of the Bible named after yourself. And the heading of this is facing all kinds of trouble. Verse 2, "My brothers and sisters, you will face all kinds of trouble. When you do, think of it as pure joy." And so when you are met with a struggle, how many of you consider it pure joy? Okay, me either. All right, James kind of comes across as like a masochist here. None of us get fired and we're like, woo! Like, watch out, world, I just got fired, but I'm going to go find a new job. I'm really excited about it. No, none of us react that way. Okay, so it would have been nice if maybe James had brought a little bit more backstory to what he's getting at here. But as we continue on, it becomes a little bit more clear. Verse 3, "Your faith will be put to the test. You know that when that happens, it will produce in you strength to continue." I like that. It says your faith will be tested. Okay, not, it's likely to be tested at some point. Not once you're ready for it. We'll let you mature in your faith a little bit, and then when the time is right, then a test will come. No, okay, we don't know when those tests are going to come. It says you will be tested, and it's going to produce strength in you to continue. So when you are tested, it produces strength, which will result in you being able to continue on. And so if we kind of Sherlock Holmes our way backwards, we can deduct that without being tested, okay, you will not have that strength, you will not have that faith to continue on. And so all of a sudden, when you realize the importance of it, it gets a little bit more serious. Now it's not really, well, do you like trials? Do you enjoy them? Do you face them head on? Now it's almost like this ultimatum, okay? He's saying, accept trials and you might make it to the end. Run from tests and you're not going to make it. You're not going to be strong enough. Verse 4. "The strength to keep going must be allowed to finish its work. Then you will be all you should be. You will have everything that you need." So again, this language, okay? You must allow this to happen, because if you don't, you're not going to make it. And not only that, but you're not going to be all that you should be. Verse 5 and 6. "If any of you needs wisdom, ask God for it, he will give it to you. God gives freely to everyone, he doesn't find fault. But when you ask, you must believe, you must not doubt. People who doubt are like waves of the sea, the wind blows and tosses them around." And so James here, he's sewing together several different things, okay? The whole thing that we're talking about is faith, but he's talking about faith in the context of tests and trials, okay? He brings in wisdom. Okay, so when we're going through tests and trials, we need wisdom during those times. All right, and finally, he brings in that aspect of doubt, okay? And about how if you're asking for wisdom and you doubt, don't expect to get it. You're not going to get it. And so we're going to take what James was talking about, okay, faith, tests and trials, wisdom, and doubt, and we're going to use that as our framework as we look at another story from the Bible. We're going to go Old Testament style this morning. We're going back to the 6th century BC, the Bible classic, David and Goliath. And so the current king at this time is King Saul, and Saul has turned away from God, and God tells his prophet Samuel to relay a message to King Saul. And the message is that because of his disobedience, God is rejecting him as king. And so God tells Samuel, hey, Samuel, I want you to go to the house of Jesse in Bethlehem. And I'm going to select a new king for myself among his sons. And so Samuel, he travels, he shows up at Jesse's house, and he invites Jesse and Jesse's sons to make a sacrifice to God. And so the oldest of the 8, okay, big family here, the oldest of the 8, Eliab, he comes in, and Saul gives Samuel, gives him one look, and he looks at him, he's like, all right, this has got to be him. So for whatever reason, Samuel thought that he just looked kingly, and this has got to be him. And Samuel was probably comparing this oldest son to Saul, because the Bible tells us that Saul, he was very tall, he was very good looking. And so during this time, Samuel and God, they're kind of having this conversation. God's like, Samuel, quit judging, okay, these sons by how kingly they look, okay? Yeah, Saul, he was tall and handsome. Look at how that turned out, okay? So this is not the right one. Next. And so next comes Abinadab, and then comes Shammah, and then comes the next 4, okay? And as these sons are passing by, God makes it clear that none of them are the right one. So Samuel turns to Jesse, and he says, you got any more? And Jesse says, yeah, we got one more, my youngest David. He's out tending to the flock. Samuel says, go get him. And so David shows up, and the Bible describes him as ruddy and handsome with beautiful eyes. And God says, everyone stand up. Samuel anoint him, for this is the next king of Israel. And so right there, in front of all of his brothers, in front of his father, in front of Samuel, David is anointed. Okay, and anointed means that you're set apart, okay, for something. You are appointed for something very specific. And so David was in this crazy moment. He was ordained to be the future king of Israel. And the Bible tells us that the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. But the interesting thing is that David, he wasn't king yet, okay? Between anointed David and the future King David stood a series of tests that was in between. So we're going to flash forward a little bit. The Israelites are at war, okay? And in Israel, on the eastern border, okay, there's a mountain range. And along this eastern border mountain range, this is where you find some of those larger cities like Hebron, Jerusalem, Bethlehem. And on the western border, okay, you have this coastal plain along the Mediterranean Sea. I kind of feel like a weatherman right now, like in front of a green screen, Some clouds are going to come in from the southeast. We're planning on getting rain. But anyway, so along the Mediterranean Sea, okay, this is where Tel Aviv is. And in between, okay, this eastern and this western coasts is this area called the Shephelah, okay? And it's a series of valleys where there's like forests and beautiful vineyards and fields, and it connects that western coastal plain to that eastern mountain range. And there was a seafaring people called the Philistines, and they were originally an Aegean people, okay? And so they lived further up north by Greece, okay, along the Aegean Sea. And this area was well known not only for their warriors, but also for their technology that they had too. And so the Greeks and the Philistines, okay, they had figured out how to use iron to fashion their weapons and their tools. And this basically left other countries kind of in the dark ages concerning their tools and weapons because they were still using bronze. And bronze had a significantly lower melting point, and so it was much easier to fashion bronze into weapons. Now, you can still get a sharp edge on bronze, but the problem is that it's not going to stay that way. And so if you compare a bronze-edged sword or spear to one made of iron, okay, the iron is superior. It is significantly better. And so apparently the Philistines, okay, they were kind of up north. They were not just content to stay up by the Aegean Sea because they decided to make their way downwards, and they settled along that western coastal region. And so from there, they followed one of those valleys in the Shephelah, okay, up to that eastern mountain range. And what they were trying to do is gain that high ground, and they were looking to essentially split the nation of Israel in two, okay? So they were coming, they wanted to attack, they wanted to, take resources. They wanted to capture cities. They wanted to increase their land. So King Saul, he finds out about this. And he brings his army down to meet the Philistines in the valley of Elah. And so what happens is you have the Israelites on the north hillside of this valley, okay? And you have the Philistines on the south hillside of this valley. And what happens is you have this stalemate, okay? Because nobody's going to go across this open valley floor, okay, completely exposed, completely vulnerable, and then have to attack the other side going uphill, okay? No one wants to do that, and so they have this stalemate, okay, where they're just on both sides of this valley. And the Philistines, they have this warrior named Goliath, okay? And the best way to describe Goliath is intimidating, all right? He's about 7 feet tall. He's decked out in armor that weighs about 100 pounds, okay? His armor is the bronze scale armor, and most of the Israelites, they were lucky to just have hardened leather as armor. So if you imagine if you're in battle, okay, and people are coming at you with spears and stuff, would you rather have like metal scale armor or just some like hardened leather? You know, I would definitely rather have the scale armor. So he's got fancy armor, and the iron head on his spear, it weighed between 15 and 20 pounds. Can you imagine that? Just the iron head of the spear, 15 to 20 pounds. Can you imagine throwing that? You know, along with the wooden shaft, you know, I don't know how heavy you're talking, but this is, you know, a massive, strong, intimidating guy. And so Goliath comes out and he challenges the Israelites to single combat. And single combat was a war practice that different countries did where each side, they would select a champion, okay? And those champions would then fight, and the winner would basically decide the outcome of the battle for each army. And it was a way to save soldiers, and it was also a way to save time too, so you didn't have to have these lengthy battles that went on. And so every morning and evening for 40 days, okay, Goliath, he comes out and he's taunting an Israelite to accept his challenge, all right? Now, David's 3 brothers, they had joined the army. And the typical age to fight for Israelites was 20 years old. And so you could speculate a little bit and say that the sons of Jesse who could fight were fighting, okay, because they were 20 years or older. So that third son, Shammah, he's about 20 years old. You have 4 more sons, okay, and now you have David, the youngest. So it's likely that David is probably around 12 years old, probably a maximum age of 15 years old. All right, so this is crazy to think about when you take into context the age of how old David is. So one day Jesse tells David, hey, I want you to bring some food to your brothers at the camp. And so he brings the food and he's greeting his brothers, and he hears Goliath's daily taunt routine. And David just can't ignore it. Have you ever had one of those moments where something happens and it's just a step too far, and you know you just can't hold back anymore? You have to say something. You have to do something. This is one of those moments. And so David, he can't stay silent. He starts questioning the other soldiers. And again, picture this, 12-year-old boy. I don't know how big he was. The Bible doesn't tell us that he was small, but either way, it's like a 12 to 15-year-old boy coming to all these, seasoned soldiers, and he's basically saying, are you just going to keep letting Goliath, talk about you this way, talk about Israel this way, talk about our God this way? And so Saul, he catches wind of what David is saying, and he calls for him. And so David shows up and he says, hey, your men don't have to worry anymore. I'm going to fight Goliath. And when I read this, I have this gut reaction where it's like, David, what are you doing? You've already been anointed to be the future king of Israel. Okay, you're going to be a king. Why would you risk it all to go and battle this giant in this moment? Why don't you just hand off the bread and cheese to your brothers and go home back to your sheep, wait until you can be king and you're going to have all these benefits? Like, why would you go through this kind of a risk? And so Saul says to David, you can't be serious. He's like, you're a boy. All right, how Goliath has been training to be a champion ever since he was a boy, and you think you can just come in and defeat him? You don't stand a chance. Now listen to what David says to Saul. I've been taking care of my father's sheep. Sometimes a lion or a bear would come off and carry a sheep from the flock. Then I would go after it and hit it. I would save the sheep it was carrying in its mouth. If it turned around to attack me, I would grab it by its hair, I would strike it down, and I would kill it. In fact, I've killed both a lion and a bear, and I'm going to do the same thing to this Philistine. He isn't even circumcised. He has dared the armies of the living God to fight. The Lord saved me from the paw of the lion. He saved me from the paw of the bear, and he's going to save me from the powerful hand of the Philistine too. Look at that faith that David has in that moment. Pastor Mark has been shared last week, and he's going to share more about how faith is a description of our relationship with God. And so one of the main things that described David's relationship with God was God's protection over David. David says, God helped me with a lion. He helped me with a bear. Why should this Philistine be any different? And so Saul says, all right, I got nobody else stepping up to fight. I guess you're it. May God be with you. And you need all the help you can get. So here, take my personal armor and weapons. And so David, he tries out the armor. And he says, Saul, thanks, but no thanks. I can't use this gear, this armor. I haven't tested it before. The armor wasn't the problem. It was probably the nicest armor in all of Israel. But David, he didn't want to use it because he was unfamiliar with it. And so David instead goes to fight with his staff, and he's got his sling, and he goes and picks 5 smooth stones from the brook, and he heads off to face the giant. And so that first aspect, okay, faith. David had faith in God as his protector, okay? Now we're getting to his test, okay? His test or his trial, okay? David didn't run away from his test. He understood that a tested king will be a more effective king. Number 3, that wisdom portion. This is the part of David's story that often gets misportrayed, okay? David didn't get lucky versus Goliath. He was smart. He used wisdom. In ancient times, there was 3 types of soldiers. You had your cavalry, okay, and this was your horses, your chariots. You had your heavy infantry, and this is what Goliath was, okay, armor, hand-to-hand combat. And then you had artillery, okay, and these were your archers or your slingers. And there was significant strategy of how to use those and when to use those and in what way. It's kind of like rock, paper, scissors. You know, each one had their strength, each one has their weakness. And so there's a lot of strategy that went in with knowing how to use them. And so Goliath, he has this expectation that he is going to be fighting another heavy infantry, okay? Goliath takes a look at David, and Goliath is offended, okay? He says, am I a dog that you send a boy with sticks to come after me? And he tells David, he says, come here so I can take your body and feed it to the birds of the sky and the animals of the ground. But David, he doesn't have any intention of fighting in this way. That would be stupid for him to try to battle Goliath hand-to-hand style, okay? Goliath obviously has the size advantage. Goliath obviously has the strength advantage, okay? He has experience, he has advantage and a history of hand-to-hand combat. Now, David, he's a slinger, okay? He is artillery. He has no intention of letting Goliath get close enough to be able to use any of his advantages. Now, I don't want you to picture David with a toy slingshot, you know, like whipping BBs at Goliath as he's like coming towards him. Okay, that's not at all what it was. Slingers, they used a leather pouch, okay, and these rocks that were usually a little bit bigger than baseball size, they would go inside this pouch, and then you had 2 long cords. And what's interesting is in this specific valley, the Valley of Elah, most of the rocks had twice the density of an average rock. It had a different, makeup than a typical rock. And so they've done a bunch of tests on rocks there, which I think is really interesting. So slingers, okay, they would put those rocks in, and they could launch these rocks, these projectiles, well over 100 yards. Okay, 100 yards was easy. Some of the better ones, they could get like 150 to 200 yards. So the 100 yards, the length of a football field, that was easy for them. And when they swung and released, that initial speed was around 100 miles an hour, okay? So again, he's not shooting BBs here, okay? He's got a rock that's twice the density of an average rock, and he's projectiling it at a speed of about 100 miles an hour. David wasn't going into this fight thinking that it was suicide. He was going into it confidently knowing that God was his protector, and he was also confident knowing that he was going to drop this giant oaf before he even got close enough to utilize any of his strengths against him. Now here's where that last part comes in, doubt. David has absolutely no doubt, and I don't know exactly how, besides just the fact that God was so powerfully with him. Because before it was just words, okay? David saying what he's gonna do, everything was still hypothetical. Now he's standing on the battlefield, okay? This massive giant in front of him, his test right in front of him, And this is where you would think that all of a sudden doubt would start creeping in, and you'd start thinking like, maybe I made a really big mistake. Maybe I can just talk it out with the giant and we can come to some sort of agreement. But instead, David, he doubles down. Listen to what he says. David said to Goliath, "You are coming to fight against me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I'm coming against you in the name of the Lord who rules over all. He is the God of the armies of Israel. He's the one you have dared to fight against. This day the Lord will give me victory over you. I'll strike you down. I'll cut your head off. This day I'll feed the bodies of the Philistine army to the birds and wild animals. Then the whole world will know there is a God in Israel. The Lord doesn't rescue people by using a sword or spear, and everyone here will know it. The battle belongs to the Lord. He will hand all of you over to us." And so Goliath, he hears this, and he makes a move towards David. And so David, he starts to approach the battle line as well. And David, he reaches into his pouch, and he pulls out one of the rocks, and he puts it in his sling. And he starts to spin his sling around, and he aims, and he lets go, and this rock goes, and it hits the giant right between the eyes, and it says it sinks into his forehead. And Goliath, he topples down face forward, either dead or knocked severely unconscious with a fractured skull. And David, without hesitating, David runs forward, and he doesn't have a sword of his own, so he pulls out Goliath's sword, and he cuts off Goliath's head. And in that moment, the Philistines are in complete disbelief as their giant, their champion, their warrior is now dead. And they turn around and they just start to run. Even as a boy, David steps up and meets his test head on. David's test was literally a life or death kind of test. And in this instance, David wasn't going to get an opportunity to learn from his mistakes, okay? If he had a mistake, he's dead. He doesn't get another chance. Rarely are most, if any of us, going to be faced with that kind of a test. But our test is still life or death. I think that at times we forget the severity, okay, and the importance of the life that we're living right now. Okay, we're running this race together, and that race requires faith, tested faith. Without that tested faith, we're going to fall away from God. Without that tested faith, we will give up eventually. Without that tested faith, we won't make it to the finish line. Our physical life is so short here on earth, and yet the decisions that we make during that time, during this time, affects where we spend eternity. And so I want to ask you this morning, what is your test? And are you accepting it? What about when your marriage isn't working and it's easier to walk away and marry someone else? What about when you don't have very much money and you feel like disregarding God's commands in the Bible to give generously? What about when you have unavoidable health issues? Do you allow anxiety, stress, fear to take over? Or do you consider it all joy because you know it's going to make you stronger? Joy is not dependent on circumstances. When you accept your test, you build your faith. When you run from your trial, you are giving up on what that trial could have produced in you. And so if you want to make it to the end, then you need to realize that you need endurance to make it that far. If you need endurance, then you need to accept those tests along the way that create that endurance in you. If you remain untested, you will continuously remain unprepared to accomplish the greater mission God has for you. Being tested is simply a part of that process to becoming stronger, more ready, more equipped. David was anointed to be king, but he needed to be tested to actually prepare him to be that future king that God had for him. And so this morning, I don't know exactly what it is in each of you individually, okay, but I promise you that God has a specific purpose for your future. And I know that for you to fulfill that specific purpose, you have to be tested. It's not if you want to, it's not when you're ready for it, you have to be tested. And if you accept that, and if you face your giants along the way, okay, you will grow stronger. You will gain that endurance. You will have that strength to continue on. But if you try to avoid them, okay, if you try to find a different way around, you're never going to be capable of fulfilling your full purpose. When you don't fulfill that full purpose, you become a weaker version of yourself. It's almost like you're this shell of who God created you to be. And so this morning, I just want to end with prayer. But I want to leave you with the question of what is your test? Okay, because if you don't know what your test is, if you haven't defined the test along the way, it probably means you're avoiding it. It probably means you're running away from it. It probably means you're doing everything you can to kind of scurry around from it. And so this morning, I want to leave you with that question: what is your test? And once you know what that test is, once you've defined that test, ask yourself, am I ready to face it? Am I ready to face my giant? Am I ready to accept that test? Am I ready to go into it head on, okay, face whatever consequences there are, knowing that it's going to make me stronger, knowing that it's going to have a positive outcome because it's going to build that endurance, it's going to build that strength in me, which will allow me to continue this faith walk as time goes on. Faith is not something that's easy. It's not something that is quick, okay? Again, faith is a description of our relationship with God. And God is there. He is ready to help us, okay? In that verse that we talked about in James, okay? He says, ask for wisdom. I'll give you wisdom, but don't doubt, okay? When you find yourself in one of those tests, in one of those trials, ask me for wisdom. I'll give you wisdom, but don't doubt that I am going to give you that wisdom. Don't doubt that I'm behind you. If you do, you're not going to receive any wisdom. You're not going to receive that help. You have to come at it knowing, okay, that I am behind you. You have to come at it and go head on, straight into it, and I will give you that wisdom along the way. Can we just close in prayer this morning? Dear God, I just thank you so much for the Bible that you've given us and the stories in there. And God, this story is it's such a challenge to me, and also just an encouragement. And it just gives us an idea and a path of how we can go about life. God, I pray for me personally and everyone here that when tests come along, that I wouldn't run from them, that I would just face them head on. God, I know that sometimes I doubt, and I'm not supposed to. God, help build endurance in me in that way. God, help build endurance in our church in that way. Looking back through the history of our church, just seeing the transition points that our church has gone through, that's a test in itself. And God, as a church, we can either decide to run away from that test, we can decide to become apathetic to that test and just kind of ignore change, or we can decide to really gather together, be unified, face whatever test comes our way together, and be stronger because of it. We just pray this all in your name. Amen. Have a great rest of your Sunday.